I wanted to immediately give, a shout out to the Bruins, UCLA. This is their first NC2A Women's Championship, and there's no doubt the coach and the team, all of the players played exceptionally. But one of the things I did find interesting about this particular women's final was the role that the media and others played, including social media, respectfully, in taunting and going after South Carolina's head coach, Don Stately, as well as the team players, the Gamecocks. I find it interesting that one of the reasons why we have the enactment, respectfully, of Title IX as a federal law in the United States is to prohibit sex discrimination in any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. But one of the things that Title IX did in the 1970s is it also highlighted what was happening in women's sports, right? With regard to and respecting the amount of monies that were given in terms of equity and equality and funding of the particular sports that were women's sports, basketball, soccer, softball. And then we look at fast forward where we are today and we look at what advancements, if at all, have really transpired in regard to women's sports. And so we look at a couple of things that took place during the Final Four. Some have been highlighted, others have been swept under the carpet, if you will. But one of the things we look at is Gino. All of us know that Gino was by far one of the best coaches that ever coached NC2A games. He is definitely up there with the likes of Dean Smith from the University of North Carolina, with Coach Special K, and those individuals. He by himself was able to bring in three UNCA, championships for the University of Connecticut. That being said, it was how he dealt with Dawn Stately that was very surprising. Gino represents the Greek Italian, right? And why is that important to state? It's important because we reference it through the terms or through the lens of him himself having families who were immigrants and at one point in time were not welcomed in collegiate and or professional sports through the lens of serving as coaching. It was something that they were not actually traditionally being offered an opportunity to do. To know that he's been able to come out of the so-called liberal state of Connecticut, the blue, if you will, and do what he has done for as long as he's done it, as effectively as he's done it. And then he shows up to engage in one of the most disrespectful things a man could have done in terms of his interactions with Coach Don Stately, both as a Black female and as a coach and as a woman that represent coach her proudly. And so one would not have looked for someone like Gino to have conducted himself in the manner in which he did. And there were several people in sports who've called him out, and Stephen A. Smith being one of them. And of course, we called him out as well. Our platform obviously is uniquely and respectfully different than Stephen A. And because Stephen A. is now on the political side, and I respect that space that he's in, and he's able to do what we do, but on a broader scale, respectfully, in that his focus now on Cyrus as well as Mad Dog Radio allows for him to say and do things that reaches a different audience, and respectfully so. And that being said, he was able to call Gino out. And as much as we have been able to respect Gino for his craft, what he's done as a head coach of the UNC, on all levels, this was an opportunity for us to say to him, "You're wrong," and to wait for an apology. I don't think anybody's waiting for an apology. I mean, make no mistake, Dawn Stately's out of Pennsylvania, Philly type. She's thick-skinned, but should she have to be in this thing that we call women's basketball, right? Should she have to be? When I think about what she experienced coming from a coach, a male coach, like Gino, it also allows me to think about the equity and equality issues that women's sports have been crying about for decades, right? So here you now have an opportunity to have women coach women. Yeah, I said that, to have women coach women. And we're still not doing it. We look at what happened in the WNBA for the first 20, 30 years almost, it looked like it was dominated by male coaches. The same is true of what we're seeing happening in NC2A sports. So wherein you have the recent successes of two uh, great basketball coaches, but one who has a proven record, and that is by far Dawn Staley, who has 3 championships under her belt for Gamecock. But we look at what the Bruins has done, a 37-1 record, and look at what they've done with that record in terms of presenting themselves before the world now as a championship, the champions. But one of the things I did notice, and I'm sure you all did too. A lot of people said that's a UNCL, a UCLA squad. Really? Let's have a frank conversation. When we think about UCLA, we think about Los Angeles, right? We seemingly think of a diverse, liberal state like California, a city like Los Angeles. You don't think in terms of a predominantly white dominated female team. You don't think of it through that lens. And so many of us, when we witness, we see uh, the interest on two folds. And the first fold is you see East versus West. And you see a predominantly black team coming out of South Carolina, head to head with this predominantly white team that's out of California. East meets West, West meets East. You're not expecting it through the lens of red meets blue. Fair enough. Okay. But through that, a lot of us did hear, witness, observe what some of us thought was a game like Iowa, where people want bets and the host of the other squads to sort of take on or personify the Caitlin Clark type. They wanted it to be presented as if this was a game of black girls versus white girls, a team of biracials, multi ethnic. And that's basically what it looked like. And then to know and listen to how some of the game was commentated, not just simply through the broadcaster networks, but respectfully also through social media. It was once again a Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese type setup, right? Except UCLA didn't really have an Angel Reese. Isn't that something to be said? So, what is happening now where a school like UCLA has a predominantly white female basketball team? And someone may make the same argument. What is to be said about South Carolina, Gamecock, having a predominantly black basketball team? But do they? And so, when we examine what is really happening, my question: what is the state of women's sports in America? Unrivaled has 90% male coaches, WNBA, then NC2A, and then you look at how we're setting up our squads, where that's either predominantly black or is predominantly white, and then the media injects, and as they inject, race is being injected. How far, if at all, have we come in women's sports where in 2026 we have a Gino who presents himself to the world in the most disrespectful way to a Dawn Stately? How far have we come in women's sports where we still have people having the conversation of not boy meets girl, right? But lesbianism, same sex relationships, uh, as well as including and not limited to the quote unquote representation of the culture, but also race, where a simple game like basketball came down to and comes down to the white team blew out the black team. I thought that was interesting. And when you read quickly, fast, and in a hurry, the commentary and how the game was presented, even now that the Bruins have won successfully, no doubt, 37-1 record, you can never take that from them. And Dawn Stately, being the woman that she is, the coach that she is, the professional that she is, she recognizes, look, this was a quote unquote smackdown. She called it what it was and she keeps it moving, right? Okay. But it's how the game was played out. The words that are being used to describe the loss. It's a major loss, there's no doubt. But did we forget that they got there? How quick do we forget that they got there? Isn't that enough for us to be able to be happy for uh, representation that includes but is not limited to two different teams from two different backgrounds and two different parts of the country, literally and figuratively speaking. Right? So, was it enough for us to just enjoy the fact that these girls are just playing their hardest and they're playing their hearts out? And in regard to them playing their hardest and playing their hearts out, there always has to be a winner. And this time the winner's the Bruins. Can we all agree that that's okay? Can we acknowledge the fact she has a 37-1 record? You talk about close. Well, how close could you get to perfection than that, right? So can we acknowledge it through that lens? Can we not inject the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese scenario? Can we not inject into the conversation of the successes of UCLA the fact that they have a predominantly white female team and that it was not about another great white hope going up against a black squad? Or is it important for us to examine it through that lens so that we can ask ourselves the serious question, almost 50 years later, how far, if as far, has women's sports come? And is it a new form of racism that they're dealing with? For decades, the discrimination that they encountered under the Title IX was financing and funding. That's no longer the case. The case now is exactly what played out last year with Caitlin and in the year before with Caitlin, both on the NC2A side and the WNBA side. And now we're seeing the same thing play out now. We even look at the sporting news when they projected their first team, second team, and third team. How dare do you not include a Cheryl Swoops, a Lisa Leslie, a Dawn Stately in your first team? 90% of sporting news first team for NC2A basketball were all white female players. How does that happen? When we look to the successes of black females in sports, when we look to the successes of the WNBA and the successes that 89 to 94% for the first 25 years of the WNBA were black female players. They did not have the representation in terms of coaching and or general management, etc. And so wherein you see the likes of a Dawn Stately that can transition from collegiate sports to professional sports to then finding her way to being a coach, to getting her team to the finals 4 times already, ladies and gentlemen. Let us not forget it. What is this, her fourth or fifth run? But she's grabbed 3 of them. And so we're going to sweat the fact that she didn't win this one. No, we're not. We're going to look at her the same way we looked at UConn when UConn got there. And it was similar arguments. We were saying she made it there. She won 3 times. People were quick to rush back and remind us, well, he got 3 peats. He's consecutive. Okay, bow down, Gino. We're going to give him the love. He definitely deserves it. There's no doubt about that, especially if you're looking at it through the lens of collegiate sports and athleticism, right? Okay, with that being said, however, we still have to look at the fact that she got there. And in getting there, she won 3 consecutive times, right? No, but she has 3. They're not consecutive. But now she's back again. So this is her fourth or fifth run at it. So the fact that she didn't walk away with it is all good. But we're still always going to acknowledge her as the best female coach in NC2A history, like it, love it, or hate it. Not because she's black, not because she's female, not because she represents the culture, but she made it to the Final Four 5 times, 4 or 5 times in her career and walked away 3 times with the chip. Is that not enough for us to acknowledge who she is? What else is Dawn Stately expected to do for us to give her the respect that she's worthy of? That we don't look to critique every single move that she makes. So I say this, we recognize the blessing, we recognize the gift, we recognize the talent of all of these individuals that played the game, all of them that make it to the final. But we also recognize those who win. So to that, hats off, Bruins. Go Bruins. There's no doubt you all came through. You represented 37-1. You had a killer record. No one could ever take that from you. Your record almost reminds me of Coach Storm, the University of Georgia football. When they were successful, I think he had like 27-0 2 years ago. And they didn't even bring him in. They end up bringing in Michigan and some other teams, right? The fact that you all were fortunate enough to be considered by the selection committee, you got there, you proved yourself, you proved that your 37-1 was not a fluke. It was something that you all have worked very hard for. You worked diligently for. You didn't win because you were white females. You didn't win because you're West Coast. You didn't win because you're Los Angeles. You won because you ladies played your heart out. You played your heart and soul, and you won. And we got to see it with our own eyes. So where there were many skeptics with regard to the 37-1 record, and that included but was not limited to the talent base for which you all were able to attain that record. People were now able to see that you took on Gamecock and y'all came game ready and you won. And so for that, congratulations, whatever that means to you going forward. Don't allow anyone respectfully to make this another Caitlin Clark, black versus white athletes. Don't create that environment for yourselves, heterosexuals versus lesbians, black versus white, east versus west. You as representatives of women's sports must come in and must take a stand and must speak out. This is one of the things why a lot of people have so much love for Sabrina B, because Sabrina, and Brianna, they will speak up. They didn't have a problem speaking up when they realized, and they did so respectfully much more than Caitlin Clark did. When they realized how the media would take a narrative and make it one of their own, how people who are engaged in race baiting will take a narrative and make it one of their own. When they realized what was happening, Sabrina stood up and she spoke out, Brianna spoke out, and a few others. You ladies become those persons, okay? Become those persons that when you see the shifting taking place, that the conversation is no longer predicated on a 37-1 record. It's no longer predicated upon hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. It's no longer predicated upon you all paid your dues to get where you got. When it's no longer that conversation, then you take to your social media and you remind people that this is women's sports and that you women are going to stick together, good, bad, and indifferent. That you're not going to allow anyone to divide you within the group. Because let me tell you what's really happening with this narrative of women's sports. It is coming down to white women in sports. It's not becoming a conversation any longer of uplifting and elevating women in sports, but a specific group. And that's never what it was intended to do. And so your generation, respectfully, our generation, respectfully, those of us who are still here, whether you're baby boomer or millennial, Gen Z or Gen X, you have a responsibility to ensure that people remember the struggles that women in sports had to encounter and what they dealt with, and that it was never ever supposed to come down to division within the women in sports. Don't allow that narrative to be created. So, hats off, ladies, for all you've done, all you continue to do. So, the second phase of this particular show today, I want to talk about Jaden Ivey. And it's a similar argument. It's dealing with discrimination, but in a different aspect. It's dealing with discrimination that plagues professional athletes. And whether or not you will lose your rights to freedom of speech and right to assemble. And the answer is no. We recently learned that he was waived by the Chicago Bulls, having been traded. And in being waived, it was predicated upon him making a comment regarding quote unquote pride. And for those who do not identify, such as myself, but I do know what pride is, it is oftentimes used to associate or assimilate respectfully with same sex relationships and people who identify under same sex umbrellas of LGBTQIA, respectfully. Okay? So he made a comment, and I stand by him regarding the comment that he made. His position is that as athletes in the NBA, he doesn't wish to align his brand with same sex relationships. Does he have the right to say that he doesn't believe that the NBA should be promoting Pride Month? Does he have the right to speak out as an athlete? I say that he does. No different than we patted Corman on the back, the San Antonio Spurs, Luke, right? We were happy that Luke Cornett made a comment regarding the Atlanta Hawks Association associating themselves with adult entertainment through Magic City. Okay, and Magic City is a strip club in Atlanta, and the city of Atlanta called themselves trying to pay homage, respectfully, to Michael Bonds. And Michael Bonds is also known as quote unquote magic. Some people say Michael Barney, Michael Bonds, quote unquote magic. And it's a strip club, adult entertainment. But it's had its share of problems over the decades while he was owner and even when he was an absentee owner. And some of those issues included, but was not limited to, everything from drug dealing to prostitution or so-called sex or associated, excuse me, respectfully, sex trafficking or human trafficking. And so when the NBA and the Atlanta Hawks were going to associate themselves or assimilate themselves with that brand, Luke spoke out, and rightfully so. I supported that, and I did a show on that. I stood there and I stand, and we eventually had it where Commissioner Adam Silver would come back, and the NBA said they were not going to allow for that event to transpire, and it was canceled. Why aren't we looking at Jaden Ivey's position regarding Pride the same way? It comes down to how we are trying to educate a generation regarding the meaning and the purpose of family oriented events surrounding professional sports. Are we promoting anything more than basketball? And what he's suggesting is when you have Pride Month, you're saying to children, you're saying to family that this is what we're promoting. And it goes well beyond the game of basketball. I already used the acronym GAME in this new game of gambling, alcohol, marijuana, and escorts, right? The Scotty Barnes, quote unquote, partner, Alyssa Holmes type, right? The ones they find on these apps. And now you want the world to think she's his partner as though they had been in this special relationship together. No, he found her on an app. She didn't take a plan B, ended up pregnant. End of this discussion, right? So now you have to take a situation like that because someone like her gets pregnant by a guy that's like 10, 12 years younger than her. And then ultimately you have to present them to the world like they're a partner, like they're in this special relationship when they're not. Right? Okay. So the same thing is coming down now. And all Jaden is saying is, listen, as a member of the NBA, the quote unquote association, he simply stated what he did not want to transpire was to be a part of someone that's promoting homosexuality. He presents himself as a Christian. And the same way he spoke out on a plane ride, uh, and an audio recording, and he videotapes it with regard to how he feels about Stephon Curry. Now, everybody's Stephon Curry's beloved, but he made some serious points. He says Stephon Curry presents himself to the world as this Christian, this holy roller, this saint. And what he simply stated is this is a guy that's cursing and he has other things about his lifestyle that don't represent Christianity through Ivy's lens. And so we punish him for doing that. We punish him for saying that. Really? There's a lot of conversations that can be had when y'all start, stepping on eggs like that and you start punishing athletes for basically speaking their truths. And that was a truth that he felt that he could speak and he did his best to support it and to back it up. And ultimately, in him doing that, he's waived. So I'm saying this. There are about 3 or 4 United States Supreme Court cases, NBA, that if you're not careful, you're going to find yourself in a class action lawsuit. And I know what I know. And I think it should happen. You don't get to tell athletes like even the Curry Irvins when he reposted on former Twitter, I think maybe it already become X at that point, the program regarding the history of Black Jews, Hebrews. And it was a documentary that had been produced and distributed through Amazon. And yet, and Amazon is a media rights partner with the NBA through Prime. Okay. And so he simply reposted. He didn't add to the conversation, he didn't take away, he reposted. And he's punished, not simply by Nike, but ultimately by the NBA. And because they want him to apologize. What do you want him to apologize for, Commissioner? That he's saying that as a black man that he believes that they are black Jews? I stand true to form. I'm a black Jew. I am. Indeed I am. And the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere is in Jamaica. Shalom, shalom. And the next one is in Brazil, 1300. Okay? And a direct descendant of the founders. And so there are those of us, so Sephardic, African, Syrian, uh, Sephardic meaning those who came out of Spain, but some of them who came out of Spain also had African roots, some Assyrian, Ethiopian, the Mennonite people. I mean, I could give you a history lesson on that, right? So here, Irvin gets cited for that by the NBA. A simple repost. That's something he did in his private time. His social media doesn't belong to the NBA, right? So we're picking and choose who we discipline, who we punish, whose narratives we choose to control. So he says this is not a form of Christianity. This guy is living this type of lifestyle. Curry's engaging in using profanity. Curry's doing A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, now Curry doesn't go for him. Curry, you're smart not to, trust you me. Mr. Bahamas, the association cutie pie. Okay, all right, okay. Thank you. Yeah, you were smart. You stay quiet on that. That was good to do. Okay, it really was. Trust that. But at the same time that you stay quiet, the NBA decides that they're going to speak on your behalf subliminally and indirectly. And the indirect conversation is to assert that he's being disciplined and waived by the Chicago Bulls because of his comment about pride. Okay, let's say that it is that and that alone. And it wasn't the fact that he took to social media regarding Stephon Curry. The bottom line is the NBA at this point, you're in dangerous waters. And you're in dangerous waters under Trump America. You're in dangerous waters under Trump America and a conservative evangelicals who are waiting for an opportunity like a Jaden Ivey, where they could step up and say, enough is enough of liberalism, enough is enough of pride, enough is enough of pretending and being pretentious, right? And coming against people's religious freedoms, where they could get a case up to Trump's Supreme Court. Remember who's up there now. You don't have Ruth Bader Ginsburg there anymore. You don't have Stevens or Breyer there anymore. You have one of the most conservative Supreme Courts in U.S. history. Okay? You don't even have a swing like Justice Stevens or Scalia on the court. So a case like Jaden Ivey would be perfect for the Supreme Court. And it would just take one conservative group to say, I am interested in representing you, Mr. Ivey, but also the other athletes whose religious freedoms have been trampled upon, even in the private sector, by the likes of the National Basketball Association. And what's going to happen when they have 4 other Supreme Court cases that have set precedent in this space? So ideally, would his situation be different than the cases that have already been ruled upon? Or would the uniqueness of this being an entity like the National Basketball Association and what rights you could strip of your players in the private sector? You're not a government agency. The court has already had the opportunity to hear and review the case involving whether a person is forced to bake a cake for a same-sex marriage. The court made their decision there. What would happen with the NBA would be huge. But there would also be individuals like a Dwight Howard who could step in. And he too might have some conversations, not so much with regard to and respecting religious freedoms, but the role of what it might be to be a bisexual or be identified as a bisexual professional athlete. And the fact that he was forced into retirement way too soon. And how much of that had to do with his orientation versus the fact that you all claimed he no longer was putting up the numbers. Really, it's just something to think about, particularly wherein he's in the same age group as LeBron and LeBron is still playing, right? Okay. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm going to tie that in to what's happening with women's sports and the conversations that surround that. And the conversations include, but are not limited to, the lesbianism, the same sex, and they're still running into those same similar issues. And it is still impacting how people view women's sports, particularly basketball. And we saw that even more so pronounced, wherein the athletes are Gamecock ready, black female athletes pursuing their goals as they did this season. The conversation, the undertones. But you don't want to have those conversations when you talk about the Caitlin Clarks or the UCLAs. But wherein you see the black female athlete, the Candace Parker's names come up a lot, didn't they? They really did. A host of others too that identify. It's just something to be said. At the end of the day, I don't think women's sports has come far enough. And I don't think that we're going to come as far as we need to until such time that we deal with the intra, you know? We've been dealing with discrimination as a gender, but there's been very little conversation about what's happening within the races, within the gender, and what needs to happen. And so I'm hoping during the off season that that's a conversation the NC2A takes up. I'm hoping it's a conversation the WNBA takes up, and women in media and women like myself. Uh, I did something last summer, and I'm going to probably do something again. But I definitely think this go around made clear, made evident, it's bigger than Caitlin Clark. This is definitely a race issue within women's sports that needs to be tackled and in a way that allows us to reach some type of resolution so that we can all move forward. Thank you for joining me. Lisa Hampton, love is selflessly authentic, having all money, power, talent, opportunities now.